Vallow Daybell was back in court and she spoke, and we're going to talk about it in today's video. Hello Sofa Squad and welcome back to the sofa. Sofa's back there. I'm right here. My name's Paul if you're new to the channel. If you're not new to the channel, well, my name's still Paul. And Bo and Luke are at my feet. I have a little pepperoni that I am giving them to coax them into a little bit of a lullaby while we sit here and talk about Lori Daybell. Now, what we're going to be doing in today's video is going over another little quick update. So the last thing we went over is, her no-show thing, whatever. So Lori did show up in court, and we're going to just talk about that hearing and whatnot. And the way we'll do that in this video is we're just going to look at some of the clips from that, the highlights. This was on East Idaho News, so I'll put a link in the bottom or in the description, whatever you want to call it, the entire hearing if you want to listen to the whole thing. It is very interesting. Now, also before you even get started, please keep in mind I ain't a doctor, I ain't a lawyer, I'm not a cop, I'm not a therapist, I ain't none of that fancy credential stuff. These are just my opinions on public information for these public cases that we see and go over. It's just that. So I urge you to do your own research, come up to your own opinions and whatnot. Now, if you're not familiar with this case, this is the case against Lori Vallow Daybell. Lori Vallow Daybell is currently in Arizona. She's facing multiple charges in relation to the death of Charles Vallow, her former husband, and Brandon Boudreaux, the attempted take on his life. He survived. She has already been convicted on several charges in relation to the deaths of her children, as well as Chad Daybell's former wife, Tammy. So they shipped her to Arizona, and that's where we stand. Now, also where we stand is she is in Rule 11. They are doing a competency hearing. Lori has switched lawyers, or well, the lawyer switched up on her, however you want to say it. And Lori's wanting to represent herself, but she's kind of stuck in this competency hearing thing. So that's the gist of where everything's at. So now she's in front of the judge. She's with her attorneys. She showed up to court. So we're going to just go over all of that now in that. So let's go ahead and get into that. So the judge is like, look, what's going on? Here we are. Spill it, right? So Lori's attorney is like, look, before we even get started, I want to make sure that I am saying that it's on the record that we did ask for this to be sealed as we are discussing sensitive information. So they're not happy about this being televised and whatnot. And we'll see some little moments come up with that in relation to that later on. Now, her attorney will say, we're waiting on this evaluation, and here's what we know so far. Let's go ahead and look at one of those clips now to see what they have to say.
So where we're at with, we had a hearing, an initial Rule 11 hearing with Commissioner Mortarosian. He had received the reports. One of those reports is competent. The other doctor indicated she wasn't able to make a report, even though she had done a records review.
So remember in that last hearing where Lori didn't show up, they were waiting to hear about this second report to find out what's going on with that. So interesting that the first one is, oh, yep, competent, good to go type thing. Now some more issues will come up with that one, but we'll get into that a little bit further. Now the defense will go on to say, you know what, they were willing to stipulate to competency, even though Lori wasn't there. We'll hear more about that later on here in a bit. Now the state didn't want this. They wanted the report from Dr. Hernandez. The defense will outline some of the key points surrounding this case, and another one is they're going to talk about key points surrounding another case that they're using for their argument, and then it will circle back around to how does Lori's case apply to this. So this next clip we're going to watch is a little bit longer, but let's see how they're trying to outline their argument.
That case starts off with that Ms. Vallow has an absolute right to represent herself, and then it goes into what has to be established before she can represent herself. She has to show a sufficient mental capacity to understand the nature of the dispute, formulate a defense, and engage with court, counsel, all of the people in the cases. The court can look at, the court has to look at some evidence in order to make that finding of putting her in Rule 11 before allowing her to represent herself. But there has to be a history of irrational behavior, some medical opinion documenting incompetency, or something else, and the defendant's demeanor. So the court has to find reasonable grounds. And that doesn't include an uncooperative attitude. You have to have a reasonable doubt as to her competency before we can place her in Rule 11. And the last part of LeCount talks about potentially just doing a preliminary evaluation and maybe getting one report before moving into a full Rule 11 evaluation.
So you hear all these outlines, right? I mean, it's a huge thing. As you can tell, they're not wanting her in this Rule 11 thing, right? And I'm just going to refer to my notes here. So these are all the things that the defense says need to be present, and then she'll walk through what they have, specifically related to Lori. So Lori has the right to represent herself. We heard this. She has sufficient mental capacity to understand what's going on. No history of irrational behavior. They have medical opinion that she's okay. Now, on that one, the judge will stop her and be like, did the doctor actually meet with Lori? And they're like, okay, look, it was briefly. And that will come back up here in a little bit. Now, she will also remind the judge of what he said before. Let's listen to that.
But Your Honor told us last court that you weren't really sure that you should have put her in Rule 11. We then showed up and said, we don't think this should be here. Dr. McGady's report, he did a review of CHS records and basically said maybe this stemmed from a disagreement. So again, uncooperative behavior doesn't equal incompetency.
She has a point with uncooperative behavior and whatnot. I guess my thing on it is this, not that my opinion matters or anything, but it's almost like what they said originally of in the other courtroom from the other thing the other day of, look, just go through the motions and be done with it, right? You'll hear as we go on where it's like this can happen, bing, boom, done. So I'm not sure why this is getting dragged out. I'm sure there's some kind of legal maneuvering to it that I'm unaware of or whatever. But that's just kind of how I view it. Now, the defense will say that they have concerns about Dr. Hernandez doing another report. They say she's watched movies on the case. That's going to come back around again here in a little bit. We'll talk about that. Now, ultimately, the defense will say, you know what, we don't want her in Rule 11. Let her get out of that and let's move this on. Now, the judge will point out the differences between what's at stake here with Lori's case and the LeCount case, which they're basing their arguments on. And a huge part of this is the judge is going to say, look, you know, previous counsel for Lori cited that she was found incompetent, right? In another case, that other one that we looked at before, her last trial. So now the defense will persist, though.
All we're saying is that where we're at right now, you asked us to come back and give you some evidence of competency. I think we have more than provided that at this point.
Let's go on now. She's laying it all out there. Now, at this point, both the defense and the judge are going to be like, well, we're going to do this colloquy. I say the word wrong. He's going to ask Lori some questions. And this is where we're going to get to hear Lori speak. So let's get into it.
Have you previously in any other criminal proceeding been referred for a competency determination?
Yes, previously.
All right. And were you ever previously determined to be incompetent at any point?
Not to my understanding. So my understanding was that the judge did the same thing that you did in abundance of caution. Let's go ahead and put her in and see. And I came out competent.
Well, when you say you came out competent, was there a period of time where you were ruled as incompetent?
I would say technically they did do that. That's how they put you into the program in that state. Correct.
How long were you in that program?
I was in that program for about 10 months.
If you remember when we watched that trial in the beginning, her original trial, it went on for years, honestly, and that was a huge part of it right there. And the judge is asking some pretty fair questions here. And Lori sounds, this is the thing that's always so disarming about this, is Lori sounds like in these moments very clear, very concise. This is what happened, but it's only until you start listening to her go off on these tangents of beliefs and things like this, and you know, that phone call with Colby that she did where she's just going into these, what kind of stuff? What did they do to get her to that point of saying, well, now you're competent?
I did go through a process of several things, several classes, competency class, and meeting with doctors and evaluators, many evaluators.
Are you aware of any diagnosis that you were given?
Yes.
And what is that?
We're going to object to that, especially with this being public and not sealed.
It's not relevant to this determination.
Okay, well then.
This was almost 2 years
okay.
ago.
Then I'm going to keep her in the Rule 11 process to determine that. And
We approach and discuss with you without it being on the without public on the record, but not public.
you mean as far as the diagnosis?
Yes.
Sure.
Now, if you remember in her last trial and whatnot, Lori was diagnosed with a delusional disorder, with hyperreligiosity, and an unspecified personality disorder with narcissistic features. Now, One thing that I heard her say, and I'm talking about the attorney, is when she said, it was almost 15 years ago, I feel like she said. Maybe I heard that wrong. I've gone back and that's what my ear keeps picking up. So I'm not sure if we're talking about two different diagnoses here. But to me, what I think they're talking about is that last one, unless my little old ears are just misinterpreting what she's saying. Now, I also go back and forth with the attorney, sitting here, don't say this out loud, don't do this, because number one, I have to separate myself. Paul, this is a completely different trial. Pretend that other stuff hasn't happened. Just isolate this. She's not wanting that to be up there. Versus the transparency and whatever the specific laws are, that it's like, well, they've determined this is going to be out there in public, so here it is. You don't get to pick and choose and whatnot. And now you'll hear the judge, and I don't know if I took the clip out or not, but after he talks to her, he'll say something to it. And I think I did leave it out. For one thing that I want to do too is just look at them while they are doing all of this. Okay, I'm just going to put the clip up to overview while I talk about it. So with Lori, look at how done up she is. She has, to me, when they show her face, full-blown glam. Now look at her little footsies here. She's got little pink socks, her little slippers, her little chains, and she's just hanging out. At this point, she has to understand, and I'm sure she does, she's never walking out of prison again, right? So she just seems so chill and just so resigned to it and used to it, but unbothered by it as well. Now, once they are done with that little sidebar and all that type of stuff, you can see a little bit of a vibe between the judge and the defense.
All that was on the record. The court reporter took it down despite the white noise.
But it was sealed for the public, correct?
What was that?
That part was sealed.
I haven't sealed anything yet, but I can.
Now, ultimately, the judge is going to be like, look, I want to keep her in Rule 11, right? He's like, I get that the attorneys, these new attorneys, you disagree with it, with the prior attorney's request and whatnot, but we're going to dot our I's, we're going to cross our T's, okay? So the judge will also talk about Lori representing herself and the timing of that. Now, the judge will say that Lori shouldn't have to waive her time because her advisory council needs a lot of time. I agree with this. Lori seems to kind of be like, let's go through this, y'all. I'm representing myself, get me out of Rule 11, let's hit it. Advisory council is kind of like, well, we need this time and we need this and we need that. And the judge is like, no, if she's ready, why should she have to wait on you? Some of the stuff, I get you have to protect the law and you have to, and they'll say this with appeals and things like this, obviously, of course, right? You need to protect that. So when an appeal comes up, it's not something blatantly obvious, but they go through so much. And it's like with some of these defendants where they just want to get up there, just let them do it. Right? Like, let's hear what Lori has to say. She clearly is going to tell her whatever. Let her represent herself. This is going to be a wild ride. Now, the counsel and the judge will have another little bit of a moment.
I didn't know the case, so I'm glad that we're on the same page on that.
Just before the court goes forward with what I believe it's going to do, I would like the court to make a factual finding and a legal conclusion as to why the court feels it has the authority to do what it's doing and the facts that support that.
All right, I think I already have, repeatedly.
I would ask the court to do that again, so we make it perfectly clear for the record.
All right.
Now, the judge will list off all the reasons, again, that he is doing this. So let's listen to it verbatim from his mouth.
The prior attorneys requested Rule 11 based on their observations. In their motion, they cite that she's, in their opinion, suffering from some form of delusions. Next, she's been previously, in their motion, found incompetent in another jurisdiction and went through a restoration process. By her own account here today, she was in that for approximately 10 months, which seems, I know it's a different jurisdiction and it's a different standard, but it seems that anyone that's in that process for 10 months is a significant period of time before they're determined to be competent to stand trial. So based on those factors, I think there's definitely enough to continue with the Rule 11 process.
No, I totally agree. I think the judge has listed numerous things there. Of course, like I already said, of course I'm ready for it to go. Let's get to Lori talking, right, and representing herself. I mean, please, right? However, you got to dot your I's and cross your T's, especially in a case like this, right, where it's so much devastation, so much loss has taken place. You don't want this stuff being flipped over for some just random thing or whatever where Lori's played them and it's like, oh, I didn't get this. You know what I'm saying? So I totally get that. Now, the state will also say, hey, if the defense has an issue with Dr. Hernandez, let's get somebody else. And they're also going to say that it's important, and they meaning the state, that it's very important for Lori to speak to the doctor so a proper assessment can be made. The state will say, hey, if the defense has an issue with Dr. Hernandez and this whole thing or whatever, get somebody else. We're totally cool with that, right? And they'll also say, you know what, we want to send the other doctor back because even though they came up with like this, you know, okay, she's competent with a caveat. I hate to use that word, but, you know, they want to send them back. And they're like, but it's very important that Lori speaks to the doctors and goes through this so that a proper assessment can be made. Now, again, the judge will ultimately replace Dr. Hernandez and be like, you know what, sure. But then he'll come back and he'll be like, the other doctor doesn't need to go back. And he's basically like, why do they need to see Lori again? And if that is the case, then why did they even like make these findings in the first place? Okay, so that shouldn't have even happened. So no, we're done with that. Replace Dr. Hernandez with somebody else. And then they're like, you know, and then let's keep going forward. There's discussions about like, you know, okay, well, next week is a short week. Depending on when you're watching this, they're talking about Thanksgiving week here in the States. You know, everything's kind of shuts down. It's really for the rest of the year in the court system, but it's just very sporadic. So next week is Thanksgiving, and that's what takes place. So, you know, they'll go back and forth with that. And they're like, well, it only takes like a few days once these orders are sent through. And, you know, you could really technically have this all kind of tidied up possibly. Now, December 5th is the next court case. They're still sticking with that, or the next hearing in this case, right? So remember, that was where it was like, well, they want Dr. Hernandez to get the findings by December 2nd. And then December 5th, they'll have this next hearing. Keep in mind, you're dealing with two different court systems right now. You're dealing with the Rule 11 competency, and you're dealing with criminal, okay? So there's this like back and forth, whatever. You know, the defense is wanting, or Lori, whatever, to get out of that mental health court, basically, whatever you want to call it, Rule 11 competency, and just get on with it kind of a thing. And hey, go girl, you go off, girl. Right? So I think that the judge was very fair in what he did and decided in this courtroom, as well as the other one. It is what it is. I think definitely, given the circumstances, the magnitude of this case, the severity, the tragedy, the loss, and the circumstances from the last case, it's like, no, just go through with this so that we can dot our I's and cross our T's. And it's like, if you want to get out of it, then just show up like the state said and get it done with. They're clearly going to find her competent. You know what I mean? They already did that. So it's just a matter of like getting through. Now, maybe this new person will come through and say, well, I don't know. I mean, we'll see, right? But I think that Lori's not wanting to drag that out. Yes, I do think there's some things going on when you start listening to her talk about this stuff that her and Chad were into. It's out there, right? So I can understand where it gets a little bit like, So anyways, we'll stay tuned at this point. That's all we can do, right? So if you're still watching, I do appreciate it. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section. And while you're down there, if you could drop a couple little sofas off there for myself, Rosco and Spirit back there, and Bo and Luke, who are sleeping at my feet, so that my little squad over here and our little squad over here has a place to hang out in the comment section and talk about this case and all the other ones we do talk about here at the Sofa Squad. And until we all meander our way down there and meet up, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Rosco on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.